Welcome, good morning everybody. I'm Chair Paula O'Connor of this meeting. Welcome to the Audit Committee, which has been held under the Local Authorities Coronavirus Meetings Wales Regulations of 2020. I would like to start with outlining how we're going to manage expectations from the outset and highlight that there may be some glitches in this meeting. I'm sure there will be. Be assured, though, that we will learn from them and keep striving towards a seamless process. I'm also conscious that a number of the participants may have issues with the bandwidth, and could I suggest that you turn off the video should that become an issue. The meeting is being broadcast live so that members of the public and others may view it. Please ensure that you mute all your mics, remember to unmute them when you're called to speak. And if you wish to speak, if you could click on the hands up, and I will keep an eye out to invite you in to speak. As I said, my name is Paula O'Connor. I chair the Audit Committee. And could I ask you all in turn to call out your name so that that can be recorded. So I start with, is Cyril in? Cyril Anderson? No? Councillor Peter Black?
Good morning,
Councillor
Chair.
Peter Black present. Sorry.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson present as well. It's just a bit of a delay on the microphone. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor David,
I'm present. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Black. Councillor David Helliwell? No. Councillor Terry Hennigan? No. Councillor Paxton Williams?
I'm here, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Oliver James?
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Councillor Peter Jones?
Present.
Councillor Jeff Jones?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Erica Kirchner? Councillor Mike Lewis?
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Councillor Sam Pritchard?
Hello, Chair.
Councillor Leslie Walton?
Present.
Councillor Mike White? No. We also have some officers present, I understand. So Simon Cookson, the Chief Auditor.
Yes, Chair.
Jeff Fitch.
Present, Chair. Morning.
Ben Smith.
Present, Chair.
Tracy Meredith.
Present, Chair.
Adam Hill.
Present, Chair.
Is there anyone present that I've missed out, please?
Yes, Chair. Richard Rowlands.
Jason Garcia.
Chair, I'm present.
Richard Rowlands.
Yes, present.
And Jeremy Parkhouse alongside.
Yeah, present.
Okay then. If we can turn to the agenda for today. If I can take any apologies for absence, which we've got recorded.
Yeah, no apologies, Chair.
Yeah. Could I take any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest, please?
Yes, Chair. Agenda item 4. Agenda item 4, a member of the Port Authority and a member of the Pendrahaven Schools.
That's a declaration from Mike.
And that's a personal interest.
Personal interest, Chair.
Thank you.
I have a personal interest as well because I am a member of the Port Health Authority. This is Mike Lewis.
Yeah.
Chair, I'm also a governor of Pendrahaven School.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson, also of on Port Health.
Councillor Paxton Hood Williams, member of Governor of Croy School.
Any further interest? No.
Yes, I've got one. I'm a governor of Oxford School, as mentioned in the report.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I looked, didn't I? Forget it.
Okay. If we can move on then to the main items on the agenda, and we'll start with the Internal Audit Charter 2021. If I can invite Simon Cookson, Chief Auditor, to address the paper, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I hope everyone's well and surviving well in this situation. Can you all hear me properly?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So the agenda item first is item 3, the Internal Audit Charter. Just to make members aware, this has periodically appeared to members on an annual basis. It's relatively unchanged since the previous version. So I'll just guide you through some of the main points of the actual document. The Charter is a requirement of the standards. Basically, every public sector provider has to have an audit charter in place. The Charter itself was approved by CMT on the 11th of March, so it's come to committee for final approval. The Charter itself is in Appendix 1 on page 5. And if you scroll through the document, you'll see it includes the definition of internal audit. It gives some terminology in terms of what is in the standards and what we interpret that as in the City and County of Swansea. So, for example, in 2.7, the standards refer to the Chief Audit Executive, which is myself as Chief Auditor, senior management, which in our case is a corporate management team, and the board, which is the Audit Committee. The document then goes through to describe the role and function of audit, the scope of internal audit within the organisation, the independence of the audit section, the consultancy role, where we have consultancy functions in terms of guidance to departments, fraud, bribery and corruption, and obviously the members are aware we have a fraud department within our team. Internal audit resources, which is the same for 2021 as it was for 1920. Quality assurance and improvement programme, which is our peer review and internal review on an annual basis, which I'll come back to in the annual report later on in the agenda. And then the appendices basically include the core principles of internal audit, which are primarily integrity, competency, due professional care and independence. It includes the code of ethics, which every member of our team has to sign a declaration on an annual basis, obviously to guide ethical conduct within the department. And then we also have the main terms of reference of the Audit Committee, as per the Constitution, and then the quality assurance guidance in Appendix D on page 19. So as I said, Chair, this document hasn't really changed drastically since the previous version. It's just come to committee for final and ultimate approval for 2021.
Thank you very much, Simon. This is obviously familiar to all members. As you say, it's been to the committee every year as part of the standards that you have to lay out. Can I ask if there are any comments? If people can raise their hands, press the button. Councillor Peter Jones.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Just really a general query. The relationship between audit and scrutiny. If the proposed changes in the membership and structure of audit committees goes ahead, i.e. the proposals for 1/3 laypersons, etc., and so on. And there's a reference to enhanced responsibility in terms of council performance extending perhaps beyond just financial control. How do you read that in terms of the role that scrutiny plays? Thank you.
Simon, would you like to respond to that?
I believe those suggested amendments to the bill are at consultation stage at this point. I know a number of my peers have raised concerns over the fact that there's an extended sort of remit in terms of performance and governance, which there would obviously be some crossover with the scrutiny team and obviously Richard Rowland's performance side. At this point, we are unclear as to whether those have been finalised. My view is that there is an issue there with us sort of duplicating something that maybe scrutiny are doing at the moment. So if that does eventually transpire, it would need a discussion with myself and the scrutiny team and the chair of audit and the chair of scrutiny. But see that's later on down the line. We'd have to see what actually comes out of the final version of the bill.
Yeah, because if I can just come back very briefly, Chair. Obviously, scrutiny covers a wide range of, in fact, anything that the council does has a policy implication and so forth. I think some of us might find it a little difficult to separate perhaps what I take a small c conservative view of the role of audit as being essentially financial, and this broader remit that might seem to cross over into the area of scrutiny. But I thank Simon for his comments.
Thank you, Councillor. If there are no further questions, we've been asked as a committee to approve this document. So can I have some raised hands?
Well, I'll call the names. I'll call everybody's names, and you say for, against, or abstention. Okay. So, Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Approve.
Councillor Peter Black.
For.
Councillor David Helliwell.
Sorry about that.
He is there. Councillor Ken Flanagan. Councillor Paxton Hood Williams.
For.
Councillor Oliver James.
For.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Approve.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
For.
Councillor Erica Kirshner.
For.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
For.
Councillor Sam Pritchard.
For.
Councillor Leslie Walton.
For.
Councillor Mike White.
For.
Okay, that's all in favour.
Thank you very much. If we move on to agenda item 4, which is the Internal Audit Strategy and Annual Plan 2021. On the agenda, it says it's for information, but I'm anticipating you looking for approval, Simon.
Yes, thanks, Chair. The draft version of the actual planned actions for the year came to committee in March. The draft plan was approved by CMT. This is the final version of that plan. Basically, there haven't been any amendments to it to date, so it is just ultimate approval of this final version.
Okay. Can I invite you to go through the paper then?
Yes, thanks, Chair. As I said, this is basically a strategy document that links to the annual plan for 2021. Members saw the draft version of the plan back in March, which does seem a very long time ago. The plan as draft and the strategy was approved by CMT back on the 11th of March 2020. The standards require all of the plan documents to be linked to a strategic document to describe how we're going to sort of deliver the plan. So the strategy document itself starts in Appendix 1 on page 26. Again, it basically just guides members in terms of how we deliver the plan. So it details the internal audit resources for 2021, which is the same for 2019-20 as per paragraph 3.2. It guides members in terms of how we deliver assurance services in section 4. Consultancy work, where we act as advisors or help advise in new processes within the department in section 5. How we actually deliver the service, which members will be familiar with anyway from experience, is in section 6. How we undertake follow-up work of audits that we completed in section 7. That would include a standard follow-up process and also the moderate follow-ups, which members get reported on a quarterly basis. How we actually format the reports of our audits. As members are aware, we have different assurance ratings and structured reports which go to department in section 8. So Appendix 2 basically is a summary of the planned work for 2021. This is exactly the same as came to committee back in March. It's just there for final approval, which gives us a detailed split of the days across the different areas of the authority. Appendix 3 is then a list of all of the planned individual audits for the year, split into different levels. So we've got the cross-cutting reviews, fundamental audits, and then the section level audit or service level audits in level 3. Again, that's unchanged since the previous draft version. Members didn't make any comments in the previous version that was presented. And then the assurance map is included in appendix for information at the end of the document, as at the 31st of January 2020. So again, if members have any questions or queries about the draft plan.
Thank you, Simon. I've got some queries, but if I can invite the councillors to raise their hands, and I've got some already. So if I can turn to Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams first, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Simon, obviously, I suppose the obvious question to start off with is when you put this plan together, the virus wasn't in place. What impact do you see that having on your procedures and how you're going to manage to meet the programme appropriately? And one other thing that I noticed as I was going through it, that certainly last year you do some analysis of how effectively we utilise grant monies that we get. I noticed you've got very little indication of doing any work on that this year. Ben will know full well that I'm getting quite interested in grants at the moment. That's another story. But we are getting about 100 million grant in terms of housing, for example, and whether we need to be looking at that sort of thing as well. So that's a question in terms of the programme. I think, Madam Chairman, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams. Simon, would you like to respond to that question before?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, you're right, Paxton, that this was an unprecedented event, actually only took place towards the end of March. So obviously a lot of the planning that was taking place towards the end of the year in putting the plan together, getting it approved by CMT and obviously by members, we weren't aware that this was going to happen. Obviously, it has had an impact in the first 3 months of this year. There is some commentary later on in my annual report, which does touch on some of those points. Just to make members aware, throughout this period, the team have been working remotely. They went home for safety reasons, as did the rest of the authority. Luckily, none of my staff have reported any complaints. They're all well, fit and healthy, which is the priority for the authority at this point in time, obviously, for everybody. They have been progressing with the plan. The way that we tried to work at this time, we basically issued the entire plan to the team to progress with whatever jobs they could remotely as far as they could, so that when we eventually get back up to running and back into the office or to a more normalised way of working, staff have already done the preparatory work for a lot of the work that can be done later on in the year. I will admit that this is bound to have an impact on completion of the plan, at least for the first 3 months of the year, sorry. But as I say, the team have been productive. They have been progressing with audits remotely. A lot of them have been completing work that was underway at the end of the year, so they were finalising bits that they could anyway. There's always some crossover at year end where we've got jobs that were ongoing, which need to be finalised in the first few weeks of the next year. A lot of the time that I've also spent reviewing audit programmes, making sure they're up to date, undertaking any sort of statutory training that was required that maybe needed updating. So the team have been progressing as far as possible with the work on the plan to date. But again, as I'll comment on later in the report, it will have an impact on the completion of the entire plan for the year. We will obviously try and pick that back up towards the middle part of the year, but it has had a negative impact for the first 3 months.
Councillor Paxton, William.
Well, there was a second question in terms of whether we're going to do any auditing of grants. Having said that, obviously, understand that we've got a difficult situation that we've got to deal with, but it's something that we need to keep an eye on, Madam Chairman, I'm sure, as a committee in that sense, to make sure that we're satisfied that what can be done is being done in terms of making sure that we can satisfy ourselves in terms of audit processes.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely. I've got another hand up, Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Simon, in the same area, Simon, the audit plan Appendix 3. Clearly, will you now, as Chief Auditor, have to look at probably what percentage perhaps you might be able to achieve, and also what will you have to prioritise, which you feel that you need to deal with first after the that's been forward for the 2021.
Simon, do you want to respond?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Sorry, you broke up a bit there, Councillor, but I think I got the gist of what you were trying to say. In terms of the percentage of work that won't be completed, at this point, I can't really give you a definitive figure. We are working through as much of the plan as we can, and I'm hoping, given the current situation, the resources that we have, it won't have a overly significant impact on the completion of the plan, but it will undoubtedly be a bit lower than it has been in previous years, where we've reached 80–90% of completion. Well, obviously, I'm hoping the work that we've done in the 3 months to date will help us to be able to achieve those later on. But as it stands, I can't really say until we maybe get back to normality how much won't be completed.
Yeah, what the second point, Simon, was, will you then now have to prioritise what areas that you think is important that you need to fulfil?
Yes, thanks, Mike. Yeah, some of the areas that are obviously key, we've looked at the current plan to see what we can progress remotely and looked at the highest risk areas. Obviously, the main risk and the key systems for the authority are the fundamental audit, which we don't tend to start until mid-year. So the key systems, we've done some preparatory work for those, and I'm hoping that the key fundamental audits won't be affected by this. A lot of those systems are accessible remotely anyway. So hopefully the key and underlying systems will be addressed. We've looked at the plan and looked at key areas and maybe seeing how we can maybe tweak some of the reviews. So, for example, I know the plan's got a number of school audits on there, but I've tried to make a slight amendment to that to look at just key areas. So, for example, I've asked the team to specifically look at procurement in schools and do a procurement audit, which can be done remotely across all of them. So we have got some coverage of the key risks of within particular audits. So even if we can't complete all of the schools, for example, we have a generic procurement review of all of the schools on the plan, which has been done remotely via Sims online. So just to give committee and to members and the authority some coverage in those areas. So we are working quite dynamically in terms of how we can change the approach to some of the reviews. But I mean, as I said, we have prioritised the key areas, and the key risk areas would be the fundamentals, which we do later on in the year anyway.
Can I?
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Councillor White. Can I invite Ben Smith in, please?
Thank you, Chair. I draw your attention in particular to Section 3 around the level of internal audit resources. Clearly, we are flexing the workforce and having to prioritise a raft of items, but for the reasons that Simon has already laid out and previous advice and discussion we've had at the Audit Committee, as your Section 151 officer, I am content with that being the minimum required to discharge as much of the audit universe as we can. My advice to you is it goes no lower. To echo what Simon has said, the prioritisation will be on fundamental systems and fundamental audits. In terms of Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams' questions around grants, he rightly raises it because it is of large scale. I do take comfort from both the internal audit universe and the external audit opinion on the large grants. When you get the annual external audit report on grants, how little is disallowed. So I have great comfort in our spectrum of coverage. The thing I would add, COVID has brought some unique challenges. This authority, in line with all others, has got to rapidly scale up and deliver a whole raft of brand new grants. It's had to create a free school meals grant payment system from scratch. It's had to create new business rate relief schemes, which, although discharged on a sort of developed on a national level, are discharged locally. That's going to be £35 million for this authority. The small business grants scheme is going to be another £50 million. These were developed at speed, so will require some internal audit review, and indeed resources have already been deployed to do fraud checking and systems checking, and will also almost undoubtedly be subject to Audit Wales review as well, given the large value of them. They are important because the point that Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams has made around the level of grants, I'm talking about flexing specific grants by over £100 million for this authority alone as a result of the amounts of grants that have been available through the UK government and Welsh government. So certainly the audit universe will materially change and the budget will materially change as we go through the year. So it was just to draw committee's attention to those matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. If I could pick up one or two things, I don't see any more hands risen. Unless...
Could I ask one question to Simon, please, Chair?
Yes, coming in.
I can't find the little button to hold my hand up. I'm sorry. It's
Councillor Lewis.
Yes, sorry. It's page 34 under education grants and others. Why is this in? The information is not available. Why is it not available? Particularly focusing on why schools' annual reports haven't been received.
Simon, do you want to respond?
Sorry, yeah, I'm just looking at the page, Chair. Bear with me 1 second. The information is not available. It's the NA you're making reference to, is it?
Yes.
Councillor? That, if you look at the top of the title, that is actually looking at the risk rating of the audit. So because they're like for the annual report of schools, for example, we wouldn't give that a risk rating. So it doesn't mean that the information is not available. It just means it doesn't apply to those particular documents.
Thanks for the information. Thank you.
Chair, can I just go back to one other point from Paxton in terms of grants? If you look at the appendix, anything with a G next to it is a grant audit. So if you look on page 35, for example, at the top, you've got a number of grants there, which actually on the plan. You'll see a G next to them. So for commissioning, for example, you've got Supporting People grant with a G. So they are included on the annual plan. Anything that is an annual grant audit is already built into the plan within the departments.
Thank you, Simon. If I can just try and draw this to a close, I think it's a very ambitious plan that you have here, particularly in the light of the current circumstances with COVID, which is it will impact on the plan, I would imagine, no matter what effort you put in there. I'm comforted that you've based it on risk. I'm comforted that the 151 officer is given a direction or a steer to look at the fundamental audit review and the increased risk around those controls, because we've already seen some diminishing of controls in previous reports you've given. You've had increased claims in grants, not enough staff to deal with them potentially, because you've had an increase in staff. So I think it's a plan that will need to be kept under review, and we may need to see a number of reiterations of this plan as the year progresses. So if I could suggest and request that we have quarterly updates of any significant changes that you need to make directly as a result of COVID.
Okay.
Because I can foresee you having to deliver probably sufficient work in a 6-month period at best at that level of assurance. So we may have to consider the level of assurance given at the year end and whether you've had sufficient coverage. So it's a high risk area, I think, for the council, and we can only do our best in managing that risk and keeping it under control, both through the internal audit and the audit committee, but also scrutiny is vital in that as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I completely agree. I have raised with the Section 151 and other officers that there will be a likely impact over the last 3 weeks on the completion of the plan. As I said, I have tried to prioritise key areas, and the fundamentals I'm hoping won't be affected by this. They should be underway mid-year, as they would normally be anyway. And as members are aware, you already receive quarterly monitoring reports from myself in terms of completion of the plan. Any major deviations from this plan will be reported to members in due course as part of that quarterly report. And again, I'm happy to bring back to members any key concerns or key issues that I've encountered in delivering the plan because of COVID.
Can I make one final comment, and for you to take away, not for you to necessarily respond? I noticed that some audit areas have a very limited number of days for you to conduct the audit review, which also questions, breadth and depth of value and the level of assurance, because you've got 5 days to undertake an audit. That gives you very little time to really scrutinise and audit those particular areas. So if you need to adjust the plan, can you consider whether those audits are adding value by way of the assurance level at a time that we're in? I don't wish you to respond to that. You can just give it some thought, and maybe we can have a discussion further down the line.
No problem, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for that. So we were asked to approve the plan. Are we happy to approve it? I'll hand over to Jeremy to take.
Okay, same as previously. If I go through the list of councillors, Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Peter Black.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor David Helliwell.
Approve.
Councillor Terry Hennigan. Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Approve.
Councillor Oliver James.
Approve.
Councillor Peter Jones. Councillor Peter Jones.
Back to him.
Sorry on that. Yeah. Oh. I'll come back to him. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes.
Approve.
I'll just say I approve. I couldn't get my mute to unmute.
Councillor Erica Kirshner.
Yeah, approve.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
Yes, approve.
Councillor Sam Pritchard.
Happy to approve.
Councillor Leslie Walton.
Approve.
Councillor Mike White.
Approved, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We can move on to agenda item 5, which is the draft Audit Committee annual report. Can I just make a couple of comments at the outset? This is a draft report. With the help of Councillor Leslie Walton, we've made some changes to the report, which have been corrected and updated by both Simon and Jeremy. So thank you for making those changes for Councillor Walton and I. Rather than go through the draft report, which contains a number of needed changes, I'm just wondering if we can defer this report and bring it back to the June meeting, the June the 23rd meeting, which has been proposed, where it will be factually correct. Can I get support from Councillor Leslie Walton for that, please?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Anything we can do to cut down on the agenda today, and if this can be deferred, then let's defer it.
So we've got a meeting on the 23rd of June, which has been suggested. So I think we can bring it back to that meeting when it's factually correct.
Excuse me, Chair. Can I just say one thing? Obviously, we've got the draft governance statement coming up later on in the agenda, and I'm just conscious that your forward and information in this report is included within that draft document, just to make members aware.
I think the amendments need to be made in that governance statement when we come to it.
Fine, okay.
So we can pick the amendments up there for the governance statement, so that's not deferred.
No problem, thanks.
Sorry, Chair, because I'm in as a guest, the hand doesn't show for me for some reason. With regards to this being not up, what exactly are we talking about? This report?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
What you said, it's not factually correct.
There are some dates in there which are referring to last year, not this year, and there are some omissions in it. I can go through the changes if you wish me to, but I'm just thinking, I'd rather address the report when it's accurate.
Fine, we leave it till June, yeah.
Chair, I did have my hand signalled. I did want just to sort of endorse really what Councillor Leslie Walton was saying, because clearly within the report we've obviously come to monthly audit now meetings, and I think I know this agenda is obviously got 16 items, which we perhaps might well have struggled to get through, So just follow on to Councillor Leslie Walton's point really, if we have we are going to have a monthly, that we have got a managed agenda that we are going to be able to get through.
Okay, thank you, Councillor White. Okay then, so we'll bring that back to the June meeting, and it'll be the accurate document that we will see. If we can move on to agenda item 6, internal annual report. Back to you, Simon.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's the Simon show today, isn't it? Okay, agenda item 6. Members have seen these reports in previous years. The annual report for the department basically just summarises the work that's been completed in the year for 1920. It's more or less a summary of the monitoring reports that members have received on a periodic basis. So if you look at section 2, it's a review of work completed for the year. The original audit plan from 1920 had 160 separate audits on there, of which 134 were completed as of the 31st of March, with seven audits were in progress at year end, 11 audits were deferred to 2021, and 8 were no longer required in year. So as of the end of the 31st of March, 93% of all audit assignments on the plan were completed, which is a record for the team, which unfortunately I doubt we'll meet this year because of the COVID situation. But I mean, as obviously we are keeping that under review. 2.5, 99% of all recommendations made by the department were accepted by clients. And then Appendix 2, which I'll scroll through to later, I won't go to it now, excuse me, shows the list of all audits that were finalised in the year, which is a accumulation really of all the quarterly ones that we've had in the monitoring reports. The additional work undertaken in terms of grant claims is on page 83, the top of page 83. And then any additional work that was undertaken included NFI, any special investigations, and the number of days undertaken and planned follow-ups of moderate audit reports, again, which committee have had reports back on a quarterly basis. If you turn to page 84 in 3.3, we've got a summary of the outcome of the recommendation tracker exercise, which was completed in December. This is a summary of the implementation of the key systems of the authority as of the 30th of September. That showed 76% of all the recommendations had been implemented at that time. And obviously we've completed a number of fundamentals in the year. During 1920, 9 moderate audits were followed up, and the outcome of those has been reported to committee as required. As a department, on page 85, section 4, we use a number of performance indicators as a team, as agreed by the Welsh Chief Internal Auditors Group. There are 11 in total, which are in the Appendix 3, which I'll get to later. We've met all the PIs for the year, bar 1, which is the average cost per directly chargeable day, which we marginally missed by about £30, primarily because we've seen a slight increase in salary costs as of everybody in the authority of about 3% on last year's costs, and the number of productive days has dropped slightly because we had additional resource last year, as detailed in 4.4. In terms of comparable PIs, unfortunately, at the time of writing the report, given the current situation, a number of the authorities haven't prepared their PIs as yet, so I haven't got any comparable data to compare in terms of the group comparables. If they do become available later on in the year, I'll report those back to committee in an appendix to one of my monitoring reports. It's fairly early on in the year, and obviously with COVID, a number of authorities haven't had a chance to prepare their PIs. Section 5 details the quality assurance and improvement programme we have in place. Members will be aware of the external peer review that took place back in 1718, which is basically where we check our conformance with the standards against a checklist from SIPFA. I have to do an internal review of that on an annual basis, just to confirm we are compliant with the standards. We have an external review at least every 5 years, so that's not due yet until 2023. Section 5.5, paragraph 5.5 summarises the outcome of my internal review of our compliance against the standards. Members will be aware there's about 336 separate lines of compliance, which is very detailed. And my internal review of that took place in February 2020. And following on from that, I can confirm we were 99.1% compliant with the standards. So based on that review, I can confirm we are fully compliant. And that was also the case on conclusion of the external review in 1718. So nothing majorly has changed, and we are still compliant with the standards as per 5.7 in the report. There's a detailed appendix later on, which I'll talk you through, which describes how we check compliance, but we'll get to that later on. Section 6 is basically a statement of independence. As members are aware, as a department and team, we are completely independent. I can report directly to the section 151 and to the chief exec if required. So there's a complete independent line of authorization there. Internal control. Section 7. basically this is looking at all of the different audits we've got on the plan across the entire audit universe, which is not just the annual plan. It includes all of the audits on a 3-yearly basis in one complete list. So if anybody is a bit uncertain of what the universe means, it's a bit of a strange terminology. It is all of the audits we've got in a complete list across the entire department. So looking at the table at the top of page 88, that gives a summary of the different assurance ratings of all of the jobs we have on the plan. As you can see, from 2019 to 2020, we've seen a slight increase in the number of moderate audit reports. As members will be aware, those have been reported in the monitoring reports that come to committee, and a slight decrease in the number of high assurance reports of about 1% either way. So looking at it across the board, it's not a major change, but it is a notable change, and members are aware that that's happened from my reports that have come to committee, and people that we've also called to committee to explain the moderate ratings. However, if you look at the entire cross section of the plan, the vast majority are rated as high or substantial assurance. If we look at the key fundamental systems in section 7.7, we've got 4 fundamental audits which are classed as so significant that we audit them on an annual or biannual basis. So we've got things like payroll, NNDR, the key fundamental systems. As of the 31st of March 2019-20, 11 of those fundamentals had a high level of assurance. 2 have a substantial level of assurance, which were accounts payable and business rates. And 1 had a moderate level of assurance, which was accounts receivable. Members are fully aware of the issues that we've had with accounts receivable, and I've had updates from the department to be assured that work is ongoing in that area. But again, it is a fairly positive situation where we've got 11 of the 14 with a high level of assurance, and the remaining 2 with a substantial level of assurance. We are continuing to keep track of the accounts receivable situation. We are continuing to audit that on an annual basis, and keeping a check of the recommendations and the implementation of those recommendations. So members will be having updates on that as required throughout the year. If you look at the cross section of all of the jobs on the plan, around about 94% of them have either a high or a substantial level of assurance. So overall, if you look at the cross section of the entire fundamentals on the audits, it is a fairly positive picture. And obviously there is some caveat to my opinion, whereby at the time of writing this report, we weren't aware of the COVID situation. The COVID situation only really impacted towards the very end of March. So it hasn't really had a material impact on 2019-20 financial year. Any impact will likely to be seen in 2021. So in terms of my opinion for the previous financial year, as of the 31st of March, that's relatively unaffected by COVID because of the work completed in the year. You'll see a number of comments from 717 to 720 in relation to COVID, which is just basically a caveat to say we aren't really sure how much of an impact that's going to have on the current year. As I said, I'll report back to committee on a quarterly basis if I have got any concerns. So based on the work completed to date, the outcome of the fundamental systems, overall in 7.21, based on the work undertaken, I'm satisfied that internal audit can provide a reasonable assurance that the systems of risk management, internal control and governance established by the council are operating effectively as of the 31st of March. And that is really my key opinion that goes into the annual governance statement, as Richard will pick up later. The rest of the report then are the appendices. So if I quickly just talk you through those. Appendix 1 gives a breakdown of the actual time spent against the plan. So it's the planned days against the actuals and any variances throughout the year. Appendix 2 is the list of all audits finalised, which is a summary really of the quarterly reports that come to committee. Appendix 3 are the PIs. So as you can see, the only one that wasn't achieved is PI number 9, where we were £30 out with that one for the reasons I explained earlier. And as you can see, there aren't any comparables there to use as yet. Appendix 4 is my internal self-assessment of my conformance with the standard. Excuse me. As you can see in the Appendix A on page 100, it gives you a breakdown of the different parts of the standards and different sections, the number of lines of conformance, and whether we conform with the C, partly conform, or compliant with the P, or non-compliant. And then the table at the top of the next page gives a summary of where we don't comply. Those haven't changed since the previous year. Members are aware of those areas. And the final part is the quality assurance programme, which I've touched on previously. And I think that's it, Chair. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Simon. I've got some hands raised, so if I can invite Ben first to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair. I'll draw your attention particularly to section 7.7 and 7.8, given Simon has drawn attention to them in terms of where there are some weaknesses. I will be honest, they are weaker than I would like them to be as your section 151 officer. You are aware of that and you have expressed your own views as an audit committee. I am pleased to advise that I took a paper through corporate management team last week. It was itself deferred for a couple of months because of the COVID response, which looks to make some strengthening arrangements in both the service centre and revenues and benefits. You are well aware of the officer advice when you've questioned at committee that those functions have been stretched. I have to advise, however, that they are likely to remain incredibly stretched, whatever I do. The reality is the accounts payable function has seen an enormous uptake in volume. I'm talking about 8,000 free school meal payments a fortnight, 5,000 business grant payments coming through. I've also got substantial increases in revenues and benefits in terms of likely applications and take up for benefits and council tax reduction scheme, and for both the receivables function and for council tax and non-domestic rates. It will come as no surprise that a number of payees are experiencing severe financial distress, which is impacting on my ability to recover and is likely to add further to the pressures on my recovery teams. In all of this, it is striking a balance between what is reasonable as a level of control, given these systems have been created at rapid pace, trying to improve the systems given they are fundamental audits, but also being cognizant of the pressures that people have genuinely been plunged into in the wider world as a result of the COVID pandemic. So I do expect those to still be a rather mixed bunch, if I'm honest, but it was just to give some context to those in particular, because I'm sure the committee will be concerned in the weaknesses in those areas, given they are fundamental audits.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ben. We've got some hands up now, so thank you for your patience. We come to Councillor Leslie Walton.
Thank you, Chair. Following on really from what Ben has just said, I'd like to be a little bit more positive and say that a lot of this report is very encouraging. And when you think that even before COVID-19 reared its ugly head, you've been under incredible pressures up until now over the last few years. So I think all things considered, this is probably a better than expected report, considering the pressures you've been under. A slightly minor point, but I'd like to thank you for making sure there was a key to Appendix A. I know I've whinged on about keys, and I do appreciate that. So let's try and have a balance here. I don't want to be complacent, but on the other hand, let's give a bit of credit and say you're obviously doing a good job in spite of difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor Walton. Councillor Sam Pritchard.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just relatively similar to Leslie, I just really want to focus on 2.4. And I think, as Simon's already alluded to, I think it's, a phenomenal amount of work has been done. And so I would just like to thank Simon and the team for that. And I think that's picked up a lot in 2.4. My only question really is around, for the eight audits that were deemed to be no longer necessary. I was just wondering, Simon, if you could give me, I don't expect you to go through all 8, but just some of the reasons why audits that we thought would be necessary are then deemed not to be necessary.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, thanks for the positive feedback, everybody. I'll make sure the team is made aware of that as well. As you say, it's a good performance given the challenges of the team. And they have done an excellent job, and I will feed that back. So thanks for that. In terms of the jobs that are not required, for example, we had a few IT audits which we were included on the plan, but those areas were then covered by other IT audits. So, for example, those sort of changes should really be picked up as part of the consultation exercise. But sometimes we see jobs that have sort of fall through the cracks, really. And when we actually come to look at them, we see this, for example, we had a corporate network compliance and an education network compliance audit, which when you actually looked at one, the controls were the same for the other. So there wasn't really a necessary need to do a separate audit. And we have seen some areas where, consultation hasn't actually picked out where departments are no longer functioning. So they've been included as part of the standard planning process. But then when we come to do them, or even if there's changes within the department from the time we put the plan together to the time of actually completing it through restructures or reorganisations, those departments might not be required any longer. So it's a number of different things. Sometimes the audits will be covered in different areas, or sometimes they don't actually apply any longer, and we wouldn't have known that at the time of putting the plan together.
Thank you very much, Simon. That's very reassuring.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Jeff Jones. Hand up.
Chair, I wasn't sure if you could see my hand raised then. Yes, going back to Ben, I know the committee actually voices concerns with regards to the accounts payable section and so on in our previous meeting and so on. And I know the council is under horrendous pressure really to get as much money in as possible at the present time. I understand the coronavirus problem and so on. When Ben Smith actually said it's still stretched, clarify, has the accounts receivable section more resource now, or has it just left as it was?
Ben, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so to clarify, at the moment there has been given no additional resource. I did take a paper, or was due to take a paper to corporate management team at the beginning of March. It was deferred. It only went to corporate management team last week. It will provide for some additional resource across the service centre, but across AP and AR, and also into the revenues and benefits function. So they've had to continue with what they've had, even though they've had to massively ramp up. The troops have worked incredibly hard, and the focus has been on maintaining as much control as we can. And I'm confident the control has been maintained. My nervousness is around the pressures in terms of recovery, because simply even if they went into it at the highest level of resources and the highest level of audit assurance, people's ability to pay in accounts receivable has clearly been impacted. In terms of payables, we have worked closely with the audit function and with Welsh Government to ensure that there are appropriate safeguards in place. Whenever you design a rapid scheme that results in shoveling 100 million quid out the door in one council, over £1 billion across Wales, unfortunately there will be attracted elements of those that will try it on. We will look to minimise the incidents of fraud. There are some low-level areas that we're already looking at, but we've tried to do it as pragmatically as possible in terms of the speed of delivery, but ensuring that ultimately taxpayers' money and the council's reputation is not imperilled.
Can I just, sorry, Jack, can I just clarify? Again, only reading the evening reports. Unfortunately, we haven't had a scrutiny finance meeting. I think there was a figure of £50 million actually quoted, with coronavirus and so on. What sort of element of that is to do with accounts receivable?
So I won't get too drawn into it in the sense that was an estimate for an initial submission submitted to Welsh Government. You're right, Councillor Jones, we have yet to take a report through to Cabinet itself. A substantial amount of the £50 million estimate was foregone income and therefore will affect either accounts receivable or revenues and benefits. There will be further reports in due course. I've tried to hold the line a little bit because the reality is trying to forecast a figure 1 week into the coronavirus lockdown at the end of March, because we were asked to do our first high-level assessment. It was a good estimate. and one that I stand behind, but not one that was sufficiently grounded to be the basis of a formal report at this stage. But that £50 million figure you saw in the Evening Post was approximately £15 million capital, £35 million revenue, and slightly more on the income side than on the spend side, to give you some context. But there will be granularity in due course as we work through several iterations with Welsh Government, because there is already a claim scheme in place for us to strike to recover some of these sums of money. And I do emphasise it's like to be some of the sums of money. All parties, from UK Government down to Welsh Government down to individual authorities, no one's got a bottomless pit. But it will be about trying to engage constructively with partners to ensure we maximise what we can legitimately recover for Swansea as a council, and strike that delicate balance between protecting those that can't pay, encouraging businesses, trying to keep businesses supported, but also being cognizant that the public sector hasn't got unlimited funds, Jeff.
Thank you very much. If I can make some final comments then, and then we can draw this item to a close. Still got some hands up on some of the Councillor Walton, Councillor Pritchard, and Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams, and Councillor Jeff Jones. If you can take your hands off, please. Just like to thank Simon and the team. This was a huge programme of work, and congratulations have already been expressed on your ability to deliver such a large programme of work. So I know you had some staffing issues during that period of time as well. So very well done for that. I would also like to thank you. At the Audit Committee, we've challenged you to revisit a number of areas. Accounts payable was one that you revisited twice. Can I also express my appreciation for you in being able to fit those in addition to all the other pieces of work that you were planning to do. So well done to the team, and if we can bring that item to a close.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. I'll give that feedback to the team.
Okay, thank you. You are happy to approve this report? Hand over to Jeremy.
Yeah, okay. I go through the councillors. Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Approve, Chair.
Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, approve.
Councillor David Halliwell.
Approve.
Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Yes, approved. But basically, Madam Chairman, I was going to come back and say, in terms of 2.4, it's one of the best reports I've seen in many years now, and I've been at this now a long time, longer than most of the people on this. So I'd like to compliment Simon on the work of the department and pass that on.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Paxton.
Councillor Oliver James.
Yeah, approve.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Approve.
Councillor Erica Kirshner.
Yes, approve, and thank you very much, Simon. It's very good report.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
Yes, approve, Chair.
Councillor Sam Pritchard. Councillor Sam Pritchard. Councillor Leslie Walton.
Approve.
Councillor Mike White.
Yes, approved, Chair, and well done, Simon, to you and the team.
Can I also vote for 4? I had
Yeah.
my mute wouldn't unmute, but I'm more than happy to vote for this.
Okay,
Thank you very much. We can move on to agenda item 7, which is the Internal Audit Recommendation Tracker Report for Q4. Can we just briefly position this paper, Simon? I think it speaks for itself, really. But
yeah, absolutely, Chair. This is a very short report. Basically, it just gives committee some information on the implementation of the recommendations that we make. So these are the follow-ups of the audits that were done in Q4. Basically, the table on page 115, 116 gives details of the recommendations that were made, and it shows at the bottom of the 207 recommendations that were made, 207 were also implemented. So it's 100% implementation rate for Q4, and basically that is the report in itself, really, just 100% recommendations implemented.
thank you, Simon. Are there any questions? Like Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams?
No, Madam Chairman.
Can you put your hand down there?
Oh, sorry, I thought I'd taken it off. My apologies. It disappeared off here, so I thought I'd taken it down. My apologies.
Thank you very much. Is this taken for approval or for noting? For approval?
Yeah,
Can we go
it's
through
not
it for
done
approval
noting.
then?
Yeah, okay. Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Peter Black.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor David Hennywell.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Oliver James.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Jack Jones.
Approve.
Councillor Erica Kirshner.
Yes, approve.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
Yes, approve.
Councillor Sam Pritchard.
Happy to approve, Chair.
Councillor Leslie Walton.
Approve.
Councillor Mike White.
Approve.
Thank you very much. Move on to the next agenda item 8, which is the internal audit section fraud function anti-fraud plan for 2020-21. Is it Jeff Fish who's going to take us through this?
Yeah, this one isn't me, Jeff. This is actually Jeff Fish, one of my fraud officers, is presenting this report, Chair.
Okay then. Welcome, Jeff. If you can take us through the paper then.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair and members and fellow officers. Hopefully, again, you can all hear me clearly. And as you say, we can have a rest from Simon for a couple of minutes. First of all, can I, on a slightly sad note, give my apologies to my colleague Jonathan Rogers. As you know, we tend to do this as a tag team. Unfortunately, Jonathan's on bereavement leave. His father passed away suddenly at the end of April, not due to COVID, but very unexpectedly. So he's off for an extended period at the moment, and I'm sure you pass on your sympathies to him. What I propose to do with your permission, Chair, is to take, as I always do with this plan, just some of the key highlights, and then afford members opportunity to ask me some questions. Again, as Ben has referred to, there are references in my plan briefly to COVID. We were able to adjust the plan to take account for that, but I can give some details of some of the activities that are already impacting on the team with your permission.
Yes, please.
So members will see from their agenda pack that we're on page 117 now. There's a number of appendices to the document. Principally, the first couple of pages set out our legal obligation to have a fraud plan, which sits as part of, but separate to the internal audit plan. It's a distinct plan, and it sets out the framework and ultimately comes under Ben's responsibility as Section 151 officer. Sets out some of the key elements, such as the principles of tackling fraud, and some of the terminology. Again, this hasn't substantially changed from last year, Chair. I would share that. But again, if there's any points that I'm skimming over that members seek clarity, please come back to me. The aims of the fraud plan, if I draw members to attention to 2.1 and 2.2, the fraud plan represents the broad areas that will be covered and sets out to provide a balance between proactive and reactive counter-fraud activity. I'll repeat the members' message again, as I do every year. We aspire to be proactive, but due to pressure on our resources, regardless of the current situation, we continue to be ostensibly a reactive fraud function. Again, we've left it in the plan because we do aspire to move to proactive function. Point 2.2, as you'll see, I managed to include some commentary here early on. The emergent fraud risk associated with COVID-19 are likely to be significant, and reactive resources will need to be diverted timelessly into previously unknown areas. And I think that's the point that Ben said there. It's about striking a balance, ensuring that those who need the support are supported, but not completely condoning fraud and opening the floodgates. It's about balance. And certainly, I've been conducting work in areas that I just hadn't foreseen when the plan was drafted a couple of months ago. Over the page then, we talk about how we measure the function, and obviously a lot of this will be picked up in my annual report later in the year, which will come to members. I'm going to skim all the way through then and pick up the appendices there, Chair. Appendix 1 is the anti-fraud risk assessment checklist, and this is a checklist that we undertake every year and benchmark ourselves against. And I'm pleased to report again that we have met all of the requirements set out in the checklist. The only one that we don't is at part 4, as in do the counter-fraud staff review all the work of our organisation. Physically impossible to do so, but we obviously make commentary. This is where we work seamlessly with Simon and his team of auditors to get the widest coverage that we can in relation to that. So I'm pleased to report that all of those have been met again this year from our opinion. Excuse me while I scroll through to the next document. Appendix 2, just a statement of fact really. It's our anti-fraud statement 2021 and some of the terminology that applies in there. Our statement of intent about preventing and pursuing. Again, you'll see within part of this report, you'll see the responsibility on members here, how they fit into the equation here. That's shown at 3.3 and 3.4. And again, all of the elements within there, officer responsibility under 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, and then down to employees. So it's embedded right throughout the authority. Again, just for information, how to contact us, and I'll talk about levels and volumes in a moment, some early indication of this year. And then if I move on then possibly to Appendix 3, the anti-fraud plan, that sets out what we propose to do this year. What we have done last year and the year before, there were 9 actions and 9 targets within that plan. We've reduced that to 7 this year, not because there are less risks, but we've been able to assimilate some of those risks together. Inherently, we'd had them as separate risks, but there was certainly cross-cutting against in some of the areas. So we've reduced those targets to 7 areas. And possibly what I wanted to focus on was some of my commentary there under 1.5, 1.6 and 1.7. It highlights the emerging threat when I wrote this report of COVID-19. It aspired to what we anticipated may come our way, and as I'll pass on some comments in a moment. So we acknowledge that we may be looking at new areas. We would be looking at further support and risk assessment for client departments, that we would need to work with other local authorities and other agencies and Welsh Government, and in fact, I'll talk about the Cabinet Office in a moment, and again, look at where we need to improve or react very quickly to some prevention strategies. So possibly, with your permission, Chair, if I just touched on what's happened in reality, it's fair to say that after about a week's lull, where we moved to permanently working from home as an agile workforce, we were adept at working from home on a sort of temporary basis. But we are now working. This is day 76 of working from home permanently. And after a short lull of 3 or 4 days, I suppose, when things were bedding in, we as a unit have actually been inundated with work. Some of our routine work continued to come in. So we were having allegations in relation to benefits fraud and other matters. Obviously, our ability to deal with that is somewhat limited. But obviously, some of the elements of the work we can work in advance for when we return to normal. As Simon said, we're planning ahead. But we were then, there were a lot of early discussions then, and I'm pleased to report positive discussions then with the Cabinet Office, with Welsh Government Fraud, with our counterparts in neighbouring authorities and Pan Wales, and importantly with our counterparts in trading standards and procurement, to ensure that the information flow and the information around prevention was being shared effectively. A huge amount of time was being diverted in relation to that. And I'm pleased to report to members that the actual occurrences of fraud at this point appear relatively low. That's not to say that we have not been targeted by fraud. We've been excessively targeted by fraud, as other authorities have. Some of those range from large-scale phishing scams to access business grants in particular. Just reference my list here. We have people passing themselves off as Boots the Chemist, Lloyd's, Greggs, Marston's Brewery. I've woken up this morning to people passing themselves off as Tesco's, all trying to access business grants. But because our systems are robust and effective, we haven't paid out on any of those. Ben mentioned, yes, some small scale ones of concern, and we are currently actively investigating those matters. We were also, as an authority, as other authorities, were subject to, again, phishing scams in relation to offering us PPE equipment. Approaches from people in China who suddenly had everything that we needed. And again, I'm pleased to report that because we're joined up and effective, again, we haven't fallen victim to any of those. Just in a wider context, wider than COVID, fraudsters have seen this as an opportunity to try and gain advantage. They know that we're not operating normally as an authority. As Ben has pointed out, we're particularly pressed in some areas, and they are trying to exploit that. But again, by effective prevention strategies being put in place, we believe that we haven't been subject to any of those. The other soft thing that's affected us as well is, and again, members may be aware of this, is that whilst the criminal element decided to take about 3 weeks off, that was about all it lasted at a local level. The police have never been so busy, and as an intelligence hub that support the police, we're inundated in relation to supporting their requests for information, ranging unfortunately from child exploitation matters to cannabis factories. It's a very busy time out there for the police. What we've also been doing regularly is liaising with SIPFA, who are supporting our business needs. And in fact, I'll be dialing into another SIPFA Cabinet Office webinar on Thursday for the latest intelligence and information sharing concerning COVID. The point that Ben mentioned earlier, I think Simon mentioned about post-event assurance. We've been having early dialogue with Welsh Government about the need for verification post-event. What is aspired to at the moment, we've been speaking to Welsh Audit Office as well, is we are due in October to undertake NFI 20. As you're aware, this is the biannual exercise of data matching, with the output would normally arrive with us in February of next year, so Feb 21. Initially, there was a suggestion that the COVID data matching across authorities would be undertaken at that time, but we had an opportunity to feed into the process because we felt that that was going to be too late. One, it was going to be a huge undertaking on top of the size of the NFI exercise, but importantly, that it was possibly too late. Well, I'm pleased to report to members that they aspire at the moment to data download next month. Next month, we're already in June, I do apologise, this month at some point, with a view to having the output out to us in September. Myself and Simon are already working on how that will impact on us as a team, and potentially some involvement from internal audit as well. Let me just glance at my notes to make sure I've missed that, see if I've missed anything. No, just some broader issues. Ben mentioned scale and volumes. Just to give some indication on a UK-wide scale, there are currently 53 different schemes of support out there, some of them new, some of them existing through universal credit as such. And the cost as at a month ago, the total cost of that support was 540 billion. So only a small percentage of that needs to be fraud for the fraud losses to be huge. But the Cabinet Office have made it clear that whilst they will not tolerate fraud, we do have to change our approach. Our focus may be in terms of obtaining recovery rather than taking clear criminal action against criminal recovery against all of these people. I think that's it at the moment, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that detailed review of the paper. Can I take Councillor Leslie Walton?
Thanks, Chair. I was very pleased that you mentioned that you try to take a balanced approach, particularly with things like the people claiming for benefits, that you don't just assume that they're fraudulent, you're balanced. I think hopefully you're going to reassure me you do the same. On page 136, it refers to internal employee matters, and knowing what stress our staff have been under for a long time, I'd like to think that we're also making sure that whilst we don't allow them to be fraudulent in any of their claims, the last thing I want to do is to stop staff claiming what they're entitled to. And I'd like to think that you also bear that in mind.
Yes, clearly, Councillor. As you said, we can't be seen to condone, and we can't fully condone. But yes, an understanding and appreciation of the circumstances will clearly be built into our approach for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Jeff have answered a lot of what I was going to ask, really, in the sort of cooperation between authorities working together and agencies. But have you seen like some common themes of the type of sort of fraud or scam topics that sort of right across the agencies and the authorities that you've been linking?
Yes, Councillor White, you're completely correct. In particular, the phishing scams that are hitting us in Swansea are being targeted on a Wales and a UK basis. So a lot of that information is being coordinated on a Wales level by the Welsh local government procurement team, and on a UK basis, we are a member of the National Anti-Fraud Network. So we're getting daily alerts in relation to those. But at a local level, we operate the Welsh Anti-Fraud Officers Group, and we are sharing information, I would say daily. It's probably hourly. And I think in the time I've been in this meeting, I've had 4 alerts already today in relation to matters to be aware of. The only gap that was in that, Councillor, if I'm honest, was around PPE. That really was a priority, and what emerged from discussions with Welsh Government fraud was that authorities were undertaking their due diligence as they have to do so individually, and then weeding out fraudsters, but they weren't then sharing that fraud information pan Wales. But a system has now been devised to that, so that each authority doesn't have to undertake its due diligence separately. So if somebody identifies a fraud, they will share that now across Wales.
That's very assuring. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Jack White. Jack Jones, sorry.
Yeah, I haven't changed my name yet.
Sorry, Jack.
All right. Yeah, I take my hat off with this wave of work that seems to be coming to you. You said earlier you actually are working at home on a permanent basis. Does that mean you are working from home forevermore now?
No, it feels like permanent, Jeff. No, I think the aspiration is for us to return. There are certainly some aspects of this job that we cannot undertake remotely. Being discreet, we do have some employee surveillance cases on hold to return to. And obviously, with regards to our criminal conduct, we cannot conduct our Police and Criminal Evidence Act interviews under caution remotely. I know that my colleagues in Trading Standards are already looking to develop some safety features in our PACE interview room, such as a cough screen, and we will look to return to that. I know there are wider discussions with regards to our facilities team in terms of what returning to work may look like and when that may be.
And, well, the DWP have also encouraged, shall we say, additional work as well. How closely are you working with them during this crisis?
Well, from a DWP point of view, I can report that the fraud function of DWP has shut down completely. All of their fraud resources being diverted into UC support. So the CFCD team, as they're known, a local and a national level, ceased to function. We had official notification about 4 weeks ago. So we are continuing to refer cases that we clearly can't pick up into the referral system. But I'm due to have a meeting with our revenues manager to see if some of that work that was traditionally diverted to them, we can start picking up remotely and case building that. Because my concern is that some of that work will end up in a very big black hole and never be picked up on the other side.
Thanks.
Ben, would you like to comment on that?
There's nothing particular I needed to add, Chair. I mean, the reality is there are a raft of wider discussions to be had around future working and the stuff that Jeff has referred to. It remains part of our wide range of measures that we have across the piece. Nothing is ruled out in terms of what we look into. Some of it has to be more discreet than others. Just in terms of the very nature of it, we are treading sensitively. But committee is well aware of the extensive powers my officers and I myself have, but there are also appropriate checks and balances that go through the legal officers to ensure that we comply with the law, notwithstanding we are in unusual times. So I don't think there's anything particular needed to add, Chair. This is to some extent speculative at the point in time, given there are wider discussions as to what the new normal is like. And I think Jeff was only referring to it in that context of what he was currently experiencing. There'll be a whole raft of things to discuss and consider in the round at officer level and at member level in due course.
Okay, thank you very much. So we draw this to a close, then we've been asked to approve this anti-fraud plan. I would just want to comment on the fact that we're still unable to undertake any proactive work, which is disappointing, but I appreciate the resource matters. I think it is a risk for this authority by not having sufficient resource to proactively discourage fraud. I wouldn't want to comment other than that. So if we can hand over to Jeremy to approve this paper.
Okay, Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Approve, Chair.
Councillor Peter Black.
Approve.
Councillor David Halliwell.
Approve.
Councillor Patrick.
Approve.
Approve.
Councillor Oliver James.
Approve.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Approve, Chair.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Approve, and I reiterate what the chair said then with regards to resource.
Councillor Erica Kirchner.
Yes, approve, and thank you for all the work you're doing, because I know the increase that's happening. You're doing a great job. Thanks.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
Yes, approve, Chair.
Councillor Sam Pritchard.
Approve, and can I just reiterate my sympathies as well with the recent passing.
Thank you.
Councillor Leslie Walton.
Approve, and can I also add that I think you're being more proactive than you realise, because you're obviously putting some things in place that you're definitely going in the right direction.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Mike White.
Yes, approved, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we can move on then to agenda item 9, which is the draft annual governance statement. I've got Richard Rowlands to speak to this paper.
Thank you, Chair. The report introduces the draft annual governance statement for 2019-20 so that the committee can review it before it's included in the statement of account. The annual governance statement itself can be found on Appendix A, which starts on page 145 of your papers, and I'll just take the committee through the main sections. The annual governance statement follows an annual review of its governance arrangements by the Council. The framework for good governance in the public sector, published by SIPA and Solace, introduces 7 principles of good governance, which are set out in paragraph 2.3 on page 142. You can also see this in the statement itself on page 146, in the diagram and in the text below that diagram. The annual governance statement reports on how the Council has complied with these principles. A range of different internal and external sources of information and evidence were used to inform the draft annual governance statement, and its development was overseen by the establishment of an annual governance group led by the Deputy Chief Executive, and other members included the Section 151 officer, the monitoring officer, myself, the Chief Internal Auditor, acting in an advisory capacity, and Councillor Leslie Walton as a representative of the Audit Committee, and that's set out in paragraph 5.5 on page 157 of the statement. Members should note what is set out in this paragraph, and also again in paragraph 3.5 on page 147 of the statement, which is that its preparation and the issues set out within the statement continue to be affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but that the governance officers are resolved to maintain effective controls during this period. Looking at the page numbers on the left-hand side of the margin of the report, so that's pages 148 to 154. It sets out the 7 good governance principles and how the council meets each one of those. And the diagram of page 155 illustrates the different forms of internal and external assurance on compliance to the principles set out within the statement. And these are then described in more detail on pages 156 to 170, and this constitutes the majority of the statement. This part of the statement also includes internal sources of assurance with information on the work of the monitoring officer, the Section 151 officer, the Chief Internal Auditor, and on pages 163 to 165, the work of the Audit Committee. External sources of assurance from our regulators, that can be found on pages 165 to 167, and the work of Cabinet, Council and committees in providing assurance, including the work of scrutiny, can be seen on pages 167 to 170. Pages 170 to 173 provides a status update on the significant governance issues identified in last year's annual governance statement and the significant governance issues identified for action for 2020-21 are found on pages 173 to 174. A note on page 173 that the actions and the timescales for addressing these issues will very much depend on the ongoing magnitude and the lastiness of the pandemic. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, before I open it up, can I ask, or can I invite Councillor Leslie Wharton to comment, because Councillor Wharton has been attending the governance group.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my initial comment is that I think the annual governance group has been worthwhile, and I think it's been a good way of helping to put this report together. And I think it's also been quite important that a member of this committee has been able to be a representative on that group. I'd like to say that one of the things that I've been able to contribute to is ensuring that that representative is fully recognised on that group. And I've managed to influence that the terms of reference now show that that's the case. So whilst I notice, and some of you know that I've been pursuing getting it recognised that that member speaks, has got a part to play at giving feedback. So I'm pleased to be able to give some feedback today. Couple of other points that I want to raise. I think it's made me realise how important the section at the end of the report, which of course is really the action that we need to progress, and that's where we've put together significant issues based on, when you can think of how many risks that the council has got on its risk register, it's quite an achievement to pull those in and hone them into significant issues, so that we can concentrate on the work we really need to be doing. So that's been quite interesting for me. On a not exactly minor point, but another thing that I feel I can have contributed. Most of you will know that I'm a bit of a stickler for detail, and it's very easy when you use these reports from previous years, which is fine. It makes total sense, because basically if the structure in previous years has been okay, why change it? But of course, dates, it's very easy to not make sure that you're making the dates are correct. And Richard will know that I've hounded him to death to make sure the diagram on page 145 is correct. And I'm very pleased to say, not only is it correct, it's in full colour. I'm just quite amazing. I think that's it. But again, as with Richard, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jeff Jones. Your hand's up, or it's gone down now.
His microphone's on.
Thank you to Councillor Walton for that overview. I understand that the member from the Audit Committee is to change every year on that panel anyway. But there's one question, perhaps to generally with the report. See section 13 committees mentioned scrutiny, audit, democratic services, and so on, but it doesn't mention the PDCs. Should they be included in this report, and why aren't they?
Chair, if I can answer that one. PDCs, I think that's something that we will look at to see whether or not they should be included in the governance statement. There was something in place when the previous governance statement was written, and they weren't referenced in the previous governance statement. That might have been for a reason. So I'll go back and look at that, and obviously, if necessary, then we'll incorporate that information into the report.
Because there are, how many PDCs there are? 5 or 6, aren't there? Or I would have thought that they would play a prominent part in the report.
Okay. Councillor Leslie Walton.
Yeah, can I add, I feel just very disappointed in myself that I didn't spot that. I spotted various things about the committees that I wanted them to be consistently alluded to, but Jeff, you're absolutely right, they need to be in this report.
That's why I think we need a fresh pair of eyes every so often.
Thank you. If there are no more comments, can I just pick up on paragraphs 9.12 and 9.13? If we could bring those dates up to the current 1920 period, because we've just approved the counter fraud plan, so if we can add that in, and the governance statement when that's going to full council, if we can update that one as well. If there are no more questions, then again, we've been asked to approve, so I'll hand over to Jeremy.
Okay, Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Peter Black.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor David Helliwell.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Approve.
Councillor Oliver James.
Approve, yep.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Approve.
Councillor Erica Kirchner.
Yes, approve. Thank you, Richard.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
Yes, approved.
Councillor Sam Pritchard.
Yeah, I'm happy to approve.
Councillor Leslie Walton.
Yes, approve.
Councillor Mike White.
Approved, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We can move on to agenda item 10, which is the performance management framework. This paper is for information. And Richard, I believe you are going to take us through.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report is on page 178, and it aims to provide the committee with an overview of the corporate performance management framework. The framework is primarily concerned with ensuring that the council's key priorities are identified, planned, communicated, and then monitored for delivery. The framework is underpinned by two main pieces of legislation: the Local Government Measure 2009, which is primarily concerned with continuous improvement, and more recently the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is really about taking into account the needs of people both now and in the future. So in summary, the framework is concerned with sustainable planning, improvement and accountability, and paragraph 3.1 on page 179 shows how this contributes to good governance. The key components of the framework are shown in the diagram on page 179. First of all, in paragraph 4.2, Council is required to set well-being and improvement objectives, and these are then set out within the corporate plan, along with the steps to meet these objectives. Corporate plan was refreshed for 2020-22 and was approved by Cabinet in March. Service plans described in paragraph 4.3 enable heads of service to set their priorities, and to show how they're spending their budget or how they intend to spend their budget and contribute to the wider council objectives in line with sustainable ways of working. Service plans are submitted in March and the whole process was reviewed last year in readiness for 2020-21. Paragraph 4 describes appraisals, which allow individual members of staff to understand their contribution to team and to service and to broader council objectives. And it also provides an opportunity for this to be reviewed and determined each year. And a new appraisal solution is currently under development. So what we have is a framework that allows for the council, for services, for teams and for individuals to set objectives within plans, which are then connected together through a common thread. Performance monitoring is the final element of the framework, which is done through the performance monitoring reports, and they are reported to Cabinet and to scrutiny on a quarterly and an annual basis. And finally, there's also the annual review of performance, which is an annual report and which reviews progress delivering the corporate plan. And the latest report was published back in October, which is the statutory publication date. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, can I open up? Anyone have any questions on the paper? I have one, and it's with regards to the diagram with performance monitoring. I was hoping to see in the paper is what the process was for holding officers and staff to account, because I'm conscious that there were continual failures to achieve savings in other areas of performance, and we were not understanding why that was a repeating theme and where the accountability was taking place. And I was hoping that this paper would have outlined some of that.
Chair, it outlines it to some degree in the sense that I mentioned that the performance monitoring reports go through the reporting process. So prior to going through to Cabinet, they are reviewed at the corporate management team. So there's a challenge there. But then it does go into the scrutiny arrangements each quarter and on an annual basis as well. And that's where there is then a significant or a public challenge to the information contained in the reports. And the performance monitoring reports, they are separate to the financial monitoring reports, but they sort of sit together and they both go through the scrutiny arrangements, and there's a relationship there.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other questions, please? Say this paper's for noting, so we don't have to approve it. Thank you, Richard, for that. If we can move on then to agenda item 11, the Wales Audit Office Annual Audit Summary. Welcome, Jason Garcia.
Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. What you should have sort of in front of you is our annual audit summary from the work that was completed last year. So this is the audit year 18-19, and basically it's summarising both the sort of financial audit work and the opinions that we give, and ultimately the performance audit work as well. So I don't think, in view of the time, there's no real messages in there that you haven't already been given. So I don't think, in view of the time, and you want to finish at 12 and there's other items to go through, I have a great deal more than that to say, other than to take any questions that members have on this particular document.
No, I'm happy for us to note this one, and if you can go into your main report then at agenda item 12.
Okay, yeah. So that's the financial sustainability one?
Yes, please.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so again, I think I'll start off with putting some context on this. This is a piece of work we've done in every local government or local authority. The work was done in the sort of final quarter generally of last year and into early this year. And certainly the conclusion reached reflected the financial position at that sort of point in time. Obviously, things have changed very much since that point in time, and I'm sure Ben, when he passes comment, will sort of reflect on some of that. I suppose the only other thing is to say that this is a piece of work that we are going to continue to do. at local government bodies, and there'll be further work, maybe in a bit more focused area. We're still working out exactly what to look at, and we'll communicate that with the council at that later in the year as to what we're going to be working on. So if I take you to the contents page, so I'd like members to bear, what we're saying in view of the context I've just put onto it. Main heading of the report: the council continues to face a significant financial challenge and needs to deliver its savings plans at a pace and scale required whilst controlling service spending within budgets. And then below that, you'll see there was several sections we looked into. The first section related to strategy. And our heading on that section said the council has developed a strategy to support financial resilience, but still needs to ensure it is sustainable over the medium term. The next area looked at sort of savings and council performance in relation to budget management. And the heading for that section talks about, for the last 3 years, the council has not been able to maintain its cost of services within annual budgets. And then linked to that on savings plans, the next heading talks about the council not having a good track record of delivering planned savings, which in turn adds to in-year financial pressures and is a factor when obviously cost of services is going over budget. The next section relates to usable reserves. And we concluded that the council has a reasonable level of usable reserves, but using those reserves to support overspends in cost of services needs to be controlled to support financial sustainability. The next section of the report related to council tax collection rates, and it says the council has achieved good levels of council tax collection rates, but the arrears balance is increasing. And then the final sort of section talked about the level of borrowing, and basically we highlighted the cost of funding significant additional unsupported borrowing will add additional pressures to the revenue budget over the medium and longer term. All of those sort of sections were looked at in all of the sort of councils that we work with. So there's nothing inconsistent in relation to what we've done in Swansea in comparison to other councils. There's obviously more detail in the body of the report, but I'm sure there may be some questions and I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Jason. Are there any questions for Jason Garcia, please? Jeff Jones, Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, thank you, Jason. Very, well, I think clear report anyway. But with regards to the actual outturn of budgets, some of the figures seem quite low. I'm talking, I can't see the page number here. It's the ones really with regards to the 1780s, sorry, it's page 193. It's 193. The amount of overspends and surpluses seem quite low in comparison to the actual overall budget. So are you actually saying there that, okay, they are actually slight overspends and slight underspends and so on, but those have been achieved because they've used reserves to get those figures?
The overspends at a cost of service level, are then covered by the reserves. What I'm saying, I think.
Right. Okay. So even though
where you've set the budget as a council for the year, if at the cost of service level, you overspend on what you set, that's got to be covered from either some corporate adjustment or use of reserves. Otherwise it'll have to come out of your sort of general fund, and that has been used on occasions of recent years, to supplement those overspends.
Right. Really, so the actual, shall we say, overspend was 1718 was £500,000. But was that achieved because they put reserves in to get that figure to that figure?
Exactly what level of reserves was used is we'd have to look into, but ultimately that £500,000 would definitely have had to come out of reserves to cover that overspend.
Okay. I got a couple of other questions, but I'll come back, perhaps.
Okay. Can I just pause a second? I believe the leader is joined the meeting and would like to comment. So, Rob, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I believe Mr. Smith was going to comment first, but I was going to come in afterwards. But again, I've joined so that if any of the members have a comment or a question for me, I'm happy to take it. But I believe Mr. Smith was going to come in first, if that's okay.
Okay, then, yeah. Come on through, Ben.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, to respond to the question raised, absolutely, yes, the audit report draws attention to the overall position, and it has been the case that in 17-18 and 18-19, as the Audit Committee, Cabinet and Council are aware, there have been some draws from general reserves and earmarked reserves to address service overspending pressures, and a lot of the focus in 19-20 has been about reining back in service directorate overspending. Of course, that is only one view of the world. It is also the case that as well as drawing money from reserves, we've put money into reserves. So back in 18-19, there was an issue with the MEAG grant. I recommended that you stump up £1 million worth of general reserves. Once the specific grant issue was resolved, at outturn, that £1 million was put straight back into general reserves. And of course, we have had many a discussion at Council on the review of the minimum revenue provision and the savings that accrue in the short term as a result of the savings on financing. And Council adopted the strategy I advised, which was that all savings in the short term were put into the capital equalisation reserve. And so, for example, in 18-19, at outturn, £12 million was put into the capital equalisation reserve as a result of the MRP review and the in-year double saving. So whilst it is true that there have been draws from earmarked and general reserves, over the 3-year period, more has gone into reserves than has come out of reserves. I think the audit report is balanced and recognised a number of pressures that there are, but it is equally the case that there are sums that have been put in. And don't forget that that money being put into the capital equalisation reserve was the muscle that was available for us to be able to respond locally to facilitate the building of the field hospital. So where it is appropriate to draw to and from earmarked and general reserves, I will continue to advise Cabinet and Council accordingly. But I think that's all I wish to say, and I'll hand over to the leader.
Thank you, Ben. Do you wish to comment, Rob?
Rob's on mute.
Yeah. Rob, you're on mute. You're on mute, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Yeah. Like Mr. Smith, I want to thank Mr. Garcia for the report. It is balanced, but again, there are some points I would like to draw out. I mean, as Mr. Smith said, you know, we have achieved a balanced budget every year, as we're legally obliged to do. And whilst I do take the point within the report that in terms of the planned savings, which are always our best guess at the start of a financial year, the strict rules that apply to directorates are that where they are finding that a planned saving cannot be met, then alternative savings have to be found to try and bring that directorate budget back into balance. We've been largely successful on that. And again, if you look at the report on page 9 of 16, obviously, you know, you'll see there the very small variances, both a small overspend and a small overspend in recent years. But largely, I mean, you've got to remember as well that this is in the context of the council having to save £770 million over a very short period of time because of the austerity budgets that all councils across Wales face. And, you know, Mr. Garcia has referenced the fact that there is nothing unique to Swansea here. One final point I would say is that, again, I wanted to pay tribute to Mr. Smith and his team, because I know they have already completed the accounts for this year and submitted them to the WAO, and I'm sure Mr. Garcia and his team will be busily working on those accounts already. But again, I believe we may be the first council in Wales to have done so, and again, that's a month ahead of the previous target that they set. So again, well done to Mr. Smith and his team. And again, I'm not able to share the figures at the moment because I haven't seen the final report, but I do understand that we are on course for a positive position with regards to outturn this year. And again, the scale of that positivity will be known once Mr. Smith finishes the work with his team. But again, just so the committee are aware of that, I do believe that we're in a much more positive position this year, and we'll be able to demonstrate that when we come to outturn. Thank you, Chair, for letting me come in.
Thank you, Leader. Right, I've got a number of hands up now that people want to come in. So can we start with Councillor Leslie Walton, please? You're on mute, Leslie. Your mic is muted.
Right. Thank you. Right. I'm a little bit puzzled, having listened to Ben explain that, in fact, with reserves, more has gone into reserves than have come out. I don't quite understand the fourth point down on page 187, where it says recent unplanned use of reserves needs to be controlled. But surely aren't reserves exactly that where you need to use them, you use them, and as soon as you're able to restore those reserves, that's what you do. And from what Ben has said, my understanding is that's exactly what we've been doing.
Ben, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, very briefly. To be fair to Audit Wales colleagues, the point they are making is that there was a draw from general reserves and there was an in-year draw from earmarked reserves. The point I was making, that the totality of reserves I have set aside or recommended to council set aside is bigger than what was drawn out, but of course they've been set aside to help finance that wider longer term capital programme. So I think that's the reason for the subtle nuancing where they're saying you still need to be cautious with your use of draws from reserves, and why they haven't particularly focused on the adds to that reserve, because it's a reserve very much for a specific purpose. Because I've given advice to council that obviously those capital financing costs, which the Audit Wales colleagues have referred to, will peak in 25-26. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Walton, reserves are there to be added to and taken away from, subject to my professional advice and council's decision. It would not be unusual though for Audit Wales to make comment where there have been substantial draws from reserves. It's just the reality of it, because they're one-off in nature. It's often harder to put money into reserves than it is to take them out, especially given, as the leader has indicated, the pressure that authorities have been under to make savings. So I think that's the rationale for the subtle nuances in position.
Thank you.
Chair, can I come back on that?
Yes.
Yeah, all I'd just like to add for members is information is over the coming weeks. As I said, for right at the start, this piece of work in these areas has been done at every council that we work with. Over the coming weeks, those reports will be on our website. Now, if that is of interest to individual councillors to see what commentary we're making on other councils comparably to Swansea, you know, then that's for them to certainly see, and that might paint a picture for them.
Thank you, Jason. Leslie, you've got your hand back up. Is it a follow-up question? No. Okay, if we can move on then to Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think a number of issues here in terms of the reserves, that we're only actually achieving a reasonably balanced outturn because we are putting reserves into the service revenue accounts as a halfway point, and have done for a number of years. So we are drawing down money from reserves to cover the fact that we're not achieving the savings which have been identified as part of that. And whereas I agree with Ben that the totality of the reserves is greater at the end of the period than it was at the start of this period, we are not necessarily putting money back into the same pots of reserves, because there are different pots of reserves with different earmarked outcomes for those pots. So yes, we have a greater totality of reserves, but at the moment what we're adding to is a capital reserve, which, as I think Ben or someone else has pointed out, is being used currently to cover the cost of building the temporary hospital in Jersey Marine, but which is ultimately there to cover the cost of building the arena and for other city centre deals. So yes, the totality of reserves is greater, but we are drawing down money to cover the fact that we're not achieving the outcomes in terms of our service, our revenue budget that we meant to be doing. So that's my observation. My other observation, of course, is yes, I am interested in what's going on in other councils, but my concern here as part of this committee is what's going on in this council and scrutinising that. So in terms of my question, in the contents of in the report itself, we're talking about the council not having a good track record of delivering planned savings, and that may well be the case for the other 21 other councils. But I'm just wondering, has the Wales Audit Office carried out any work to look at the planned savings to see whether those planned savings were realistic, or what reasons were being made as to why those particular planned savings have not been achieved?
Jason, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, certainly. It was certainly considered, as part of all of the council's pieces of work that we've done in this area, and I think there generally will be a multitude of reasons as to why, planned savings, are not potentially being achieved, in different areas of the business and in different areas of the country. So, it's not that there would be one answer to come back to you and say, this is the ultimate reason. As I said, those other council reports will comment on their apparent success or failure at delivering their savings, exactly like, this one does for Swansea. There has generally been, a trend, over, the last few years that, you haven't been achieving the savings that you've identified for yourselves. Now, if that carries on continuing as austerity gets, continues to bite and whatever, it gets more and more difficult to identify these savings. That money has to come from other sources, and it is a challenge going into the future. Ben's talked about the MRP and it taking effect in relation to increasing the costs on the revenue budget in the mid 2020s. So ultimately I think this report is all about sort of giving you a bit of a position statement, but recognizing in the medium term there are some significant challenges which ultimately have only got worse as a result of the COVID-19 situation for the council into the medium term.
Can I rephrase the question then? Obviously, this current financial year is going to be a nightmare because of COVID-19, but we're looking at the past financial year and previous financial years. We've achieved, I think it's 62.4% of planned savings. Is there a trend over the last 3 years where we're actually improving our performance in achieving savings?
I'd have to go into the detail to get that information, but I'm more than happy to sort of dig it out, or Ben, if he knows the information, can tell you that. But yes, we certainly looked at it year by year, and I could certainly come back to you on that information unless Ben knows the answer now.
Can I come in there? I'm conscious of time. There's quite a few hands up. So can we go back to the detail perhaps outside of the meeting? Perhaps Jason, you can respond to Peter Black, Councillor Black.
Yeah, I can certainly dig into the detail. That's no problem. We've certainly got it year by year.
Okay. I've got a couple of more hands up now. Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously, I think there's not what the report is saying is something that a number of us have been saying for a number of years now, so there's nothing particularly new in that. The thing that did surprise me a little bit about it was that we do have a reasonable level of usable reserves, just on the basis that Ben is always telling us that you can't keep on dipping into our general reserves all the time just to balance the books. Although I have to say, I think you were far more successful last year, Leader, in terms of balancing your books much more easily. It was just basically a general comment, much as what Peter has said already, in essence, in terms of where money's gone back into reserves. It is into the capital equalisation reserves and has come out of other areas, as I understand it. But Peter's really said more or less what I was going to ask there, in that sense anyway. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Can we Councillor Mike White, can we make the questions as quickly as we can now so I can bring this to a close? Councillor Mike White.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Garcia stated the issue of austerity, which we all have to suffer under. But my concern is, obviously, in regards to the issue of not on the track record, the money that we've had to put into services are statutory service, which you've got a legal obligation to provide. You know, we can't get away from that, and I feel that, you know, this is the situation that not only Swansea but every other council across the country.
Ben, do you want to comment on that?
I'll perhaps comment in the round to try and address a number of the questions very, very briefly. I'm not surprised the auditors have said the level of reserves overall are adequate, because if they had a different view, then I'd failed in my statutory duty to ensure that at all time reserves are adequate. I think part of the nuancing here has been the focus and the advice I have given on drawing from some of those earmarked reserves and general reserves, which, as you know, I have ruled are at the minimum level that I was comfortable with. But equally, when one takes a step back and looks at reserves in the round, including the totality of what is in that capital equalisation reserve, which, as Councillor Blacker said, yes, is set aside for ostensibly a specific purpose, but again is within my gift to advise Cabinet and Council to flex as needs be, that taken in the round for the size of the authority, there is sufficient muscle. I think, to be fair to Audit Wales colleagues, they could only work on what they had at the time, and there were weaknesses in 17-18 and 18-19 in terms of controlling directorate spend, and there was a need to draw from some of those reserves. As the leader has indicated, given that I've submitted the draft statement of accounts to Audit Wales, when the outturn is revealed in due course for 19-20, I think the position will have been materially addressed as a result of firm advice that I have given through scrutiny, Audit Committee to Cabinet and Council, and I'm pleased to say that councillors have followed my advice in terms of seeking to rein in particularly that problem point, which has been directorate overspending. So that's tried to address the sort of three sets of questions in one, with your permission, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. I mean, for me, I think it is a fair and balanced report that the Wales Audit Office has presented. The most important thing for me as Chair of the Audit Committee is there weren't any surprises in this report. I think we've been well informed throughout the period of time, so I did not have any surprises when I read this report. If there are any more pressing questions, can I ask them to be quick, or am I allowed to take this paper and close it? Just ask for approval.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a report then on agenda item 13. Wales Audit Office proposes for improvement. I've got Richard presenting this one. Richard Rowlands.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Again, Richard, if you can, briefly summarise it, because I'm conscious of time now.
Okay, so the report is on page 201, and it shows a 6-month update on progress meeting the Wales Audit Office proposed improvement covering the period July to December 2019, bearing in mind that the report's been deferred from earlier on in the last financial year. The main part of the report is the table on page 203, which gives an update on previous recommendations that were being tracked and remained open during this period. So progress in each of the recommendations is recorded within the table, but just to summarise them each very quickly in turn. So arrangements are now in place to record delegated decisions. There is a refresh and a relaunch of the Sustainable Swansea programme. A review of staff appraisals and solutions for that is underway, and work is being undertaken on workforce plans as part of broader workforce planning. In the meantime, work continues to close down these particular recommendations, and subsequent Wales Audit Office reports and action plans to address proposals of improvement continue to go to scrutiny as a matter of course to ensure that they're appropriately challenged and that they're followed up. And they will also subsequently continue to come to Audit Committee for information purposes, and to assure the committee that they are being addressed and that they are being actioned in a timely manner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got 4 hands up, and I think they've just not been closed down. Councillor Jeff Jones, Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams, Councillor Leslie Walton and Jason Garcia. Do you have any questions? If not, can you close your hand? Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this paper, please? No? Okay then. The paper's for information, so if we can just move on to agenda item 14, which is Ben, Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring.
I think I'd best say nothing very much, Chair, given time is against us. It is an information-only item, and you will soon have the outturn report, which we've already alluded to elsewhere on the agenda, so I have nothing further to add.
There's no critical features in this report that we need to know.
Again, in similar vein, there is nothing in there that wouldn't surprise you given the reports you've had for the first and second quarter and what I've already referred to elsewhere on the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate that. Has anyone got any questions? No, that was for information. So if we move on to agenda item 15, and it's the Audit Committee Tracker Report. I didn't intend to go through this in any detail. It speaks for itself. There are some ongoing actions which I know Jeremy is chasing officers to get closed down, but we'll see what the status is in the June meeting and put some pressure on if they're not closed down for that meeting. If we can move on to agenda item 16, the Audit Committee Work Plan. Again, Jeremy.
Excuse me, Chair, I've got my hand up. I wanted to mention something on item 15.
Apologies, go ahead, Councillor Watton.
Just a quick point. I'm pretty sure you said this, but are we going to have the DBS tracker response? Are we going to review that? Is that going to be on the agenda later on in the year?
From memory, I think Simon Cookson has got it included in his plan for a revisit from an audit perspective.
Because I do think it needs looking at again.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I'm not that satisfied with the response we've had so far.
I totally agree. The response was basically saying what they're going to do, but there was no assurance that that was being.
That's what they're doing, yeah.
Yeah. So I did ask Simon Cookson if he could, Cockins, if he could put it in his work plan, and I believe he has.
Yes, sir. Can I step in here? The quarterly monitoring report that's due to come to the next meeting for quarter 4 does detail the follow-up outcomes of all of the moderate reports that were done in Q4. DBS is included in that update, and we have found in that follow-up that it needs a further follow-up. So we have put time in the plan for 2021 to actually undertake more work in that area because we've had issues with the follow-up again, but you'll find further detail in the next committee meeting.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Councillor Walton. Agenda item 16, again for information. This is the Audit Committee Work Plan, and I will look at this again with Jeremy to make sure that the agenda is contained to allow us to operate within that 2-hour slot. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your participation. I think for the first time we've done this virtual meeting, we've overrun about 6 minutes. And I don't think we had many blips. The next meeting is on the 23rd of June. Jeremy will be canvassing members to see whether a 10 o'clock in the morning meeting is better or a 2 p.m. meeting. I'm flexible, I don't mind, so I'll go along with the councillor's choice. So if I can draw the meeting to a close, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep.